All right, well, here we are. I'm with my good friends Brandon and Jenn Peterson, and these guys are planting a church in New York City, in Manhattan, Resurrection Life Church. You guys have been at it 3 years, isn't that right?
Yeah, we've lived here going on 5. The church has officially been launched for 3 years as of last Sunday.
Wow, last Sunday. What a way to celebrate Palm Sunday on your third anniversary, right? You guys in Manhattan, I'm sure that must be um, just surreal. That you're in the epicenter of the pandemic, and what 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 has it been like for you as you're a pastor in the middle of all of that? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, it has been surreal. I think it really, it really hit last week when, in Central Park, in the part of the park where we always have our church picnics, all of the emergency field hospitals started going up by Samaritan's Purse. So that was just a real gut check when we all went, "Oh, this is really serious." And then even today, like the reports we get from funeral homes are just overrun and they don't know what to do. And, just asking people to pray for those who are caring for the deceased and for the families of the deceased. Like that's the reality of where we are right now.
Wow.
Yeah, just even the pictures of the refrigerator trucks that have come in just to put, bodies at this point because morgues can't hold, the number of deaths that are happening so quickly. And obviously there are illnesses that, essentially kill as many people, but not so quickly. I mean, it's just
Mm-hmm.
been so fast. I mean, we'll have, I think yesterday, over 600 deaths in the city, and just, yeah, it's hard to even imagine and
Yeah.
fathom that. But it's been good to connect with our church people who are doctors and nurses as well, just to get an idea from the inside what's actually happening. And what they're saying is that what you're seeing on the news is actually what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's very accurate. It's not sensationalized at this point.
Mm.
So
Wow.
definitely, they're
You
on the
guys
front
are,
lines.
they're on the front line. They're the heroes, aren't they?
Yep.
Um, and that's really cool that you have medical workers in your church, and I'm sure you guys are praying for them and supporting them. And but I wanted to bring you on today to talk about planting a church in an urban context. Uh, like Jenna, if I recall correctly, you were raised on a farm in Iowa, isn't that right?
Was.
And so how did you end up in Manhattan, New York? That's what I want to know. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a long ways from Iowa. And you guys were actually on staff together at a large church in the Dallas, Texas area, suburban church. So this must be very, very different for you. How did you end up planting a church in New York City?
Yeah, we kind of feel like we did the stepping stone from rural to suburbs to city. But honestly, I did grow up on a farm, and Brandon grew up in Iowa too. I always loved the city. I couldn't wait to get to the city. So in a lot of ways, it's not a surprise that God did this. But we were on staff at a church in the suburbs of Dallas for 17 years, and we had taken a trip here to New York, and just for fun. It was Brandon's 40th birthday, and while we were here, it was just like God just kind of planted this seed of an idea in our hearts, and we knew, I think, even from that trip that that's where God really turned our gaze to the city and said, I want you to plant a church in Manhattan. And I mean, I think it took us 6 months to really realize that. And then once we said yes to it, it was just like, oh God, you've been preparing us for this our whole lives.
Mm.
Even though, like, I would have thought I was the last person on the planet to plant in an urban center. Um, I was telling somebody else last week, I remember at one of our general conferences several years ago, there was a push for urban urgency. I don't know if you remember that.
That was
And
there.
and I was cheering everybody on and going like, yes, we need urban
Yes.
churches, and thinking like that would never be me. But then when it was Manhattan, and just even how we're wired, what we're passionate about, how much we loved this city, it made sense. And yeah, so that was kind of phase 1 of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we just, and in fact, when we first started thinking about New York, we weren't even thinking church planting. We were just thinking, I feel like God wants us in New York for some reason.
Yeah.
And we had talked about church planting in Texas, but it never felt like the right context for us. And we sort of started the conversations at times, and then we would kind of back away and everything in terms of planting a church there. So when we contacted the district here about maybe coming to New York, the question was really, could you see us doing something here? What could you see us doing here? And the first question was, well, have you thought about church planting? We're like, yeah, we thought about it. And well, what about planting a church in Manhattan? We don't have a Wesleyan church in Manhattan. So what about planting a church in Manhattan? And it was like a bit of a gut punch, actually. It was like, oh, okay.
We're equal parts excited and equal parts terrified at the same time.
Well, that's probably the perfect place to be, because see, if you weren't terrified about it, it probably wouldn't be a God-sized dream, right?
Yeah.
Right, for sure.
Yeah, God did something pretty cool there. And no, I'm guessing that church planting in Manhattan is a little bit different than, say, church planting in Tuscaloosa. I'm guess what are some of the unique things that you've seen or observed about planting a church in an urban context like that?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things come to mind right away. One is that it's never like churches in urban places are typically smaller for the effort that is involved in actually planting it. And so, for instance, like in New York, a church of 300 people, which in suburbia would be an average, maybe somewhat average or maybe large, but medium sized. A church of 300 in Manhattan would be considered a raging
mega
success.
Church.
A raging success.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about a population, particularly center city, which is where we are, which is like, yuppies, young urban professionals, up and coming, a lot of finance and attorneys and doctors and, that sort of demographic. You're talking less than 5% are Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Like attend a gospel-centered, Christian church. Highly Jewish, very, very secular. So just the worldview itself, it's not like the South, and it's not like most other suburban contexts as well. So that's one thing. It's just that it's a longer runway to get launched, and it's not, from what we are used to, it's not the same sort of like numerical results. Not that we're striving for that necessarily, but it's just different. And then the other thing, and it's just very expensive. So that's another factor too. It's particularly New York City. And New York City itself has its own culture. In fact, it's many cultures. It's actually, if you look at the entire city of 9 million people, it's probably dozens of smaller cities of different sort of, different ethnic groups. Mm-hmm. There's 2 different Chinatowns, one out in Queens and one in Manhattan, and just very, very, the entire world is in New York. So New York itself is very complex and layered. And so the context that you're actually in is very, very important, because it's not homogenous at all across the city, so it's very complex that way. So the cultural learning involved is much more like being a missionary. One of our mentors here basically said, just because everyone speaks English, and not everyone speaks English, but just because people speak English doesn't mean they're in the same culture you are. So people coming in from outside of New York, it's just a very steep cultural learning curve.
Wow. That's profound. And I think a lot of times we think that, if they speak English, they're going to get it.
Yeah.
And they may not, they may be in a different world. Different values, different perspective of everything.
Yeah.
And when you said about the cost of things, I'm sure that even a cost for a church space would be huge. How did you figure that part out?
Well, very few churches, particularly young churches, very few of them own any property. It's all rental, but we just looked around the neighborhood that we were in, and I think we looked at 150 different places before we found the one that we've been in for 3 years now. But
So what is it? What kind of place is it?
So we're in a school, and it's not a public school, it's an independent school, and they actually have a gym on the 12th floor. So we actually have this beautiful worship space because it's floor to ceiling windows on 2 sides, and so we actually get to look out onto our mission field.
Oh, wow.
Worship, which is beautiful. So we're really grateful for that. And a couple other things that I was thinking of while you were talking was just, obviously it is a very diverse city. I mean, it's just the way it is. And so we do pray and try to be intentional about diversity in our leadership, making sure that our leadership team is diverse in order to reach our community that is so diverse. And it's also very, very transient. So you've got your New Yorkers who are like born and bred, and they're kind of their own category, because like you're not a New Yorker until you've lived here at least 10 years.
Yeah, they're very suspicious of everybody
Yeah.
else, for sure.
But then you've got people who are extremely transient, who are really here to build their resume for 2 to 4 years. 4 would be like amazing, but most people are here for 2 years. And so in a lot of ways, ministry here is like a college ministry or a military, setting, because you have such high turnover. I think the first 2 years we were a church, we turned over about a third of our congregation every summer.
Oh, wow.
Simply because they were moving out of the city. Or graduating if they were grad students. So it's just, you're constantly reinventing who you are as a community.
Wow. But just think about the impact of that.
Oh, it's amazing.
Sending them out. You're sending missionaries all over the place, out of the salt shaker and into the world.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And you're constantly meeting new people, because you always have new people that are moving into the neighborhood as well.
Yeah, because people say that, like if for somebody's in a new community, they are more open and receptive to building these kinds of spiritual friendships and stuff. So in some ways, like on the front end, that could be a blessing for you guys. Whereas, like, let's say if it's a rural farming community that everybody's rooted and established, they're all Southern Baptists, they've bred and born Southern Baptist, they're not going to shift, This is kind of neat that you have that opportunity.
Yeah, and really, I mean, denominational lines are pretty blurred here, because we're all like, we meet with other pastors from across the city all the time, because we just realize that we need each other. We need every brand of Christianity around the table, in order to reach so many people.
That's the way it works with mission fields. I know people work together on the mission field a lot of times. The Pentecostals and the Baptists and the Wesleyans all harmonize. Sounds like that's what you guys are doing in New York City. It's like thinking of it like a mission field.
Yeah, for sure.
Very much so. Yeah. And the ecology of different kinds of churches in the city is really unique. It doesn't take one kind of church. So you have, first generation immigrant churches, which is, built around the immigrants who have come from wherever home is, somewhere else in the world. And that's a very specific kind of church. But then you have second generation immigrants who don't tend to identify with the first generation church. And so there needs to be a kind of church for them. Then you have, churches like in Center City, like our church, which is a lot of young, most of our church are in their 20s, maybe early 30s, so very young. But that's a different kind of church as well. So if you look, probably you could identify 6 or 7 different kinds of churches that need to be present within sort of the ecology of the entire urban space. And so I think because of that, it's not like there's sort of a suburban kind of church, which sort of has a homogenous brand to it across, different suburbs. Here, especially in New York, it requires all different kinds of churches, plus the denominational piece. So we need Methodists and Wesleyans and Presbyterians and all of the different kinds of churches at the table too, because of different kinds of people.
Wow. I've never thought about the multi-layers of that. And I mean, that really, it really points to the importance of thinking through intentionally what you're doing. And because that way you can't just do one size fits all. But whatever you're doing, it's a beautiful thing. I watched a little bit of your Palm Sunday service as preparing for our interview here. And you have a great worship leader, by the way. She's awesome.
She's
is
awesome.
So
Wonderful.
Yeah, and I loved your message and just the whole thing, very personal. And I think like in a big city like that, I'm guessing that the more personalized you can make it, the better it is. Wouldn't you say, like, because everything is impersonal when you're in the street, for instance.
Yeah.
But to bring it up close, that was the feeling that I got when I watched your service, that that you were creating like a family kind of feel.
Mm.
Was that intentional, or was that what you were thinking about when you were doing that, or did it just happen by accident?
Yeah, well, I think it's who we are too, and I think
Yeah.
that's the spirit of our one of our core values is authentic family.
Hmm.
And I would say for most people, that's the one that tends to drive their participation. Is
Mhm.
this is their spiritual family, and or particularly because of it's such a transient church, the spiritual family that they find with us is really their connection both to God and to people in the city, because it can be, even though there are 9 million people, it can be a very, very lonely place, especially for recent college graduates or others who have come to the city to make it in whatever field they're in. It's a brutal place, and so for them to find a community and a family in a church has been really, really significant. So I think that's been part of our niche, actually.
Yeah. Oh, that's a beautiful thing. Well, guys, hey, I've pretty well taken up the time, but this has just been beautiful, and I thank you so much for taking time out of Holy Week to come and talk to me like this. God bless you. I've just admired your ministry for so many years. And by the way, you guys, they are great musicians. They really are, both of them. I remember I was just singing "Wow" the other day. Remember that one? Oh,
Yes.
what a wondrous God are you. I don't know how you do the things you do. Yeah, I love that. You both are gifted musicians. Maybe, hopefully you're going to write a song in the middle of this pandemic.
Mm.
I'm really grateful for all of the artists and poets and songwriters right now, just hearing their voices. And I think we need that prophetic voice in these times for sure. So,
Yeah, we do.
and thank you
Well,
for, we are who we are today because of you pouring into us. So
Yes,
thank you
absolutely.
for just being such a teacher and encourager for us. So we're
well,
grateful.
thanks, you guys. God bless you. Thanks so much. This has been great. I've really enjoyed our time together.
You too.
Likewise. Yeah.
All right, you take care.
You too.
Okay.
All right,
Bye.
bye bye.